The silence in the room was heavier than the scent of truffle and terror. On one plate sat Kai's soul, a symphony of a dozen perfectly orchestrated risks. On the other, his opponent's, a single, flawless, brutally simple statement. Kai didn't know it then, but the man wasn't just there to judge his cooking. He was there to collect it. The air in the converted warehouse crackled, thick with the ghosts of flavors and the anxious sweat of 100 spectators. Two plates sat under a single, harsh spotlight on a black linen-draped table. Kai's plate was a vibrant landscape, a seared scallop resting on a bed of saffron risotto, adorned with a micro-herb salad and a swirl of squid ink reduction. It was complex, audacious, a story told in layers. It was everything he was. Across from it sat his opponent's dish, a single piece of pan-seared sea bass. The skin was a perfect, golden lattice of crispness. The flesh beneath, visible from a precise cut, was pearlescent and moist. It rested on nothing. It was adorned with nothing. It was an insult in its simplicity, a flex of such profound confidence it made Kai's intricate creation feel childish, insecure. He was Kai, the 24-year-old prodigy who had torn through New York's underground culinary scene like a storm. For 6 months, he had been undefeated in the Iron Fork, a high-stakes, word-of-mouth competition where chefs bet their reputations and a significant amount of cash. Tonight was the championship. His opponent was not a chef, but a phantom, a legend spoken of in hushed tones, Mr. Sterling. He wasn't just a critic. He was the critic, a man whose palate could supposedly discern the emotional state of the farmer who grew the potato. He had never competed. Until tonight. He had watched Kai's final match last month and sent a simple, hand-delivered note. "You're good, but you are not yet memorable. Let's change that. The final match, you and I. Your entire winnings and your future against a debt of my choosing." Kai's arrogance, his burning need to be the best, didn't even let him hesitate. He accepted. Now, standing in the breathless silence, he watched the 3 judges, a grizzled Michelin star chef, a notorious food blogger, and a restaurateur who owned half of Soha, take their final bites. They tasted his first. Their eyes closed, nods of approval, a faint smile on the blogger's face. Kai's heart hammered against his ribs. Then they moved to Sterling's. They each took a forkful of the sea bass, and they stopped. They didn't smile. They didn't nod. They simply stared at the plate, their expressions a mixture of awe and confusion, as if they had just tasted a fundamental truth of the universe. The old chef, Renaud, cleared his throat. He looked at Kai, his eyes filled with something like pity. "Kai," he said, his voice raspy, "your dish is a masterpiece of technique and passion. It is the work of a brilliant young artist." He paused, then turned his gaze to the other plate. "This," he gestured to the sea bass, "is not a dish. It is a verdict. It is flawless, utterly, inhumanly flawless." He looked at Sterling, who hadn't moved a muscle, his face a placid mask. "The winner is Mr. Sterling." The air rushed out of Kai's lungs. The crowd's collective gasp was a physical blow. It was over. 6 months of climbing, of sleepless nights, of burning his hands and soul down to the wick, all gone. He had lost. He had bet his future, and he had lost. The crowd dissipated like smoke, leaving Kai alone in the vast, cooling space. Sterling approached, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the concrete floor. He was a man of indeterminate age, with silver hair cut with surgical precision and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wasn't gloating. His expression was as neutral as it had been all night. "A brilliant effort, Kai," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. "You forced me to be perfect. For that, you should be proud." "Take the money," Kai mumbled, his voice hollow. "It's all there, over 100,000. Sterling offered a thin, dismissive smile. "I have no interest in your money. Money is a vulgar way of keeping score." He gestured toward the exit, where a sleek black sedan idled, its engine a low purr. A driver in a dark suit stood by the open rear door. "The bet was for a debt of my choosing. It's time to settle it." A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into Kai's veins. This wasn't about a loss. This was about something else entirely. He followed Sterling, not out of choice, but because the gravity of the man's presence seemed to pull him along. The car door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing him inside. The car moved silently through the sleeping streets of New York. The windows were tinted so darkly that the city lights were just blurred streaks of color. The silence inside was absolute, broken only by the faint whisper of the climate control. Sterling didn't speak. He simply sat, looking straight ahead, perfectly still. Kai's mind raced, concocting 1,000 scenarios. Sterling would blacklist him, ruin his name. Maybe he owned a restaurant and would force Kai to work for him for free for years. A form of culinary indentured servitude. Each possibility was worse than the last. He tried to speak, to ask where they were going, but the words died in his throat. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken power. He was no longer the brilliant chef, the rising star. He was a passenger, a piece of cargo being delivered to an unknown destination. His entire world had shrunk to the plush leather and suffocating silence of this car. They drove for what felt like an hour, ending up in a desolate industrial district by the water. The car pulled up to an anonymous-looking brick building with no signs, no windows, just a single heavy steel door. The driver opened Kai's door. Sterling was already waiting for him. He led him inside. The interior was a shocking contrast to the derelict exterior. It was a restaurant, but unlike any he had ever seen. The space was vast, minimalist, and cold. Polished concrete floors, raw concrete walls, and a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. There were perhaps a dozen tables, each a simple slab of black granite, spaced impossibly far apart. There were no decorations, no art, no music. The only sound was the distant, clinical hum of a high-end ventilation system. It felt less like a restaurant and more like a museum for food or a mausoleum. "Welcome to Apotheosis," Sterling said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "My private dining room, no customers, only guests." Sterling led him to one of the granite tables, and they sat. A woman emerged from the shadows. She was dressed in a simple, severe gray uniform. She moved with a preternatural quietness, placing 2 glasses of water on the table without a sound. As she leaned over, the sleeve of her uniform slid up slightly, and Kai saw it, a strange, dark tattoo on the inside of her wrist. A single, cracked stalk of wheat. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Hers were empty, devoid of any emotion. Then she was gone. "You believe failure is an event, Kai," Sterling began, steepling his fingers. "A loss, a moment in time that you can recover from, forget, and move past." He leaned forward, his cold eyes locking onto Kai's. "I believe that is a waste of a powerful resource. True failure, the kind that changes a person, must be visceral. It must be permanent. It must be a part of you." "What do you want from me?" Kai asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I want to give your failure meaning," he said. "I want to make it unforgettable. You have a gift, one of the greatest I have seen in a decade, but it is undisciplined. It is tainted by ego, by the need for applause. You cook for them?" He gestured vaguely toward the imagined world outside. "I cook for the ingredient, for the platonic ideal of the food itself. Your loss tonight wasn't because your technique was inferior. It was because your philosophy was." His words were calm, rational, delivered with the placid authority of a surgeon explaining a necessary amputation. He was breaking Kai down, piece by piece, justifying what was to come. He was making his madness sound like wisdom. Sterling stood up. "Come." Again, Kai followed. He was led past the state-of-the-art kitchen, which was as silent and sterile as the dining room, and toward a small, unmarked door at the very back. Sterling opened it, revealing a room that stopped Kai's breath. It was a small, white, tiled space, like a medical examination room. There was no furniture except for a single, intimidating black leather chair in the center. It was a high-end tattooist's chair, adjustable and menacing. Next to it, on a rolling stainless steel tray, lay a tattoo machine, its coiled wires neat, its needle gleaming under the single, powerful overhead fluorescent lamp. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, fear. Kai's blood ran cold. He finally understood. The blacklisting, the indentured servitude. His imagination had been too small, too conventional. This was so much more personal, more violating. "No," he said, taking a step back. "Absolutely not. This is insane." Sterling turned, his expression unchanged. Is it? You bet your future. Your career as a chef is held in your hands, is it not? Specifically, your right hand. The hand that finishes the plate. The hand that shakes the hand of the man who gives you your third Michelin star. It's your money hand, Kai. He picked up a small, laminated card from the tray. With this, your future in haute cuisine is over. No respected establishment will hire a head chef with a mark like this on his plating hand. It's a stain. A brand. It says you gambled against the wrong house and lost. He was right. The world of fine dining was built on image, on perfection. A visible tattoo on a chef's hand was already a risk. A tattoo like this, it would be a story, a rumor. A mark of spectacular public failure. It was a career death sentence. The woman in the gray uniform entered the small room, her movements still utterly silent. She held a thin piece of transfer paper. Sterling took it from her and held it up for Kai to see. It was a single basil leaf, but it was drawn with excruciating, heartbreaking detail. It wasn't the vibrant, proud leaf one would use in a pesto or to top a pizza. This leaf was wilted. The edges were curled and bruised. A small, dark spot of decay was beginning to form near the stem. It was a perfect, artistic rendering of potential turned to rot, the symbol of his craft corrupted. Every chef I collect receives a memento of their defining failure, Sterling explained softly. The sommelier who mistook a 45 Mountain Rothschild for a common table wine wears a shattered glass on his neck. The baker whose hubris led her to create a bread that would not rise has a cracked stalk of wheat on her arm. He nodded toward the silent woman who stared blankly at the wall. Your sin was simpler. You took something beautiful, a perfect ingredient, and tried to make it better with a dozen needless complexities. You suffocated it with your ambition. You made it wilt. I won't do it, Kai said, his voice shaking with a mixture of terror and fury. He turned to leave. The silent driver was now standing in the doorway. He wasn't large, but he was as still and solid as one of the granite tables outside. He didn't threaten. He just stood there, blocking the only exit. You misunderstand, Kai, Sterling said, his voice taking on a razor's edge for the first time. You are not being asked. The bet was made. The debt is owed. The only choice you have now is whether you sit in the chair yourself or whether you are helped into it. He looked at Kai's hands, clenched into white-knuckled fists. Don't compound your mistake by damaging the canvas. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a wave of cold, nauseating resignation. There was no escape. The door was locked long before he walked through it. He had been so focused on the battle, he never saw the trap. Slowly, his legs trembling, Kai walked to the chair and sat down. The leather was cold against his skin. The woman in gray came forward. She wore black latex gloves. She didn't look at his face. Her focus was entirely on his right hand. She gently took it, her touch impersonal and firm, and placed it palm down on the armrest. Kai tried to pull back, a last, pathetic instinct for freedom, but her grip was like steel. She cleaned the back of his hand with a cold, stinging antiseptic wipe. The smell filled his nostrils, sharp and sterile. Then she picked up the stencil. She carefully peeled the backing off and pressed the wilted leaf onto his skin. When she lifted the paper, a perfect purple outline remained. It sat there, just over the knuckles, a prophecy of the wound to come. Sterling moved to stand behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't a comforting gesture. It was an anchor, a claim of ownership. The artist, as Kai now thought of her, picked up the machine. She dipped the needle into a small cap of black ink, then pressed the foot pedal. The buzz started, a low, angry hornet's sound that vibrated through the floor, up the chair, and into his bones. It was the only sound in the white room. She brought the needle closer to his hand. He squeezed his eyes shut. Then came the pain. It was a sharp, biting, violating sting, a line of fire being dragged through his skin. It wasn't the worst pain he had ever felt, but it was the most significant. Every vibration of the needle was a pulse of his defeat. It was the physical act of signing away his future, written not in ink, but with ink, directly into his flesh. A single tear escaped his closed eyelid and traced a hot path down his temple. Kai opened his eyes and forced himself to watch. He had to see it. He had to bear witness to his own desecration. The artist's hand was impossibly steady. She traced the purple outline with the black ink, her movements economical and precise. The thin black lines of the leaf's edges and veins appeared on his skin, surrounded by a growing halo of red, irritated flesh. The buzz of the needle was hypnotic. The pain settled into a steady, rhythmic agony. He focused on the details of the room to keep from screaming. The way the fluorescent light reflected off the steel tray. A tiny scuff mark on the white tiled floor. The utter impassivity on the artist's face. She was not cruel, nor was she kind. She was simply a tool, an instrument of Sterling's will. Sterling's hand remained on his shoulder. His thumb began to move in a slow, circular motion, a gesture that might have been soothing in any other context. Here it was a terrifying intimacy, a master stroking his new property. After the outline was complete, the artist switched needles. A larger grouping for shading. This was a different kind of pain. A grinding, abrasive sensation like being scraped with hot gravel. She started filling in the bruised, decaying parts of the leaf using a dark, purplish black ink. His hand was on fire. It was swelling, throbbing with each pulse of his heart. Blood and excess ink were wiped away with a rough paper towel, the motion brisk and efficient. He could feel the humiliation welling up inside him, a hot, bitter bile. He was a chef. His hands were his life. They were meant to create, to nurture, to transform raw ingredients into art. Now his dominant hand was being systematically defaced, turned into a canvas for his own shame. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the buzz of the machine, the grinding pain, and the weight of Sterling's hand. Kai's mind drifted. He saw himself at 16 getting his first job as a dishwasher, the steam and the clatter and the joy of just being in a kitchen. He saw himself graduating from the Culinary Institute at the top of his class, his parents weeping with pride. He saw himself winning his first iron fork battle, the roar of the crowd, the taste of victory, sweet and intoxicating. Each memory was a fresh torment. Each buzz of the needle seemed to mock those moments, overriding them with this new, ugly reality. His ambition had been a hunger. He had been willing to devour anything to get to the top. And now he had been devoured himself. There was a strange, terrifying clarity in the pain. He had flown too close to the sun, and Sterling wasn't the sun. He was the void that came after. The buzzing stopped. The sudden silence was more shocking than the noise had been. The artist wiped his hand one last time with a clean, damp cloth. The sting was sharp, but the ordeal was over. She held his hand for a moment longer, then released it. He slowly, hesitantly looked down. It was horrifyingly beautiful. The artistry was undeniable. The lines were perfect. The shading was subtle, creating a photorealistic image of decay. The wilted basil leaf lay on the back of his hand as if it had fallen there from a dying plant. The bruised purple and sickly dark green were vivid against his reddened, swollen skin. It was a masterpiece of tattoo art, and it was the ugliest thing he had ever seen. It was his failure, made permanent and exquisite. Sterling removed his hand from Kai's shoulder. "There," he said, his voice laced with a quiet satisfaction. "Now it is memorable." He slid a small, thick envelope onto the steel tray. "For your time." The driver stepped away from the door. Kai was being dismissed. He stood up on shaky legs, his right hand throbbing, feeling alien and heavy. He didn't take the envelope. He walked out of the white room, through the silent kitchen, across the vast, empty dining room, and out the steel door into the gray light of a New York dawn. The city was waking up. Taxis rattled by, steam rose from the manholes. It was the same city he had set out to conquer, but it felt entirely different. He felt like a ghost haunting its streets. He shoved his right hand deep into his pocket, a futile gesture. He couldn't hide it. It was a part of him now. The wilted leaf was branded onto his skin, a constant, silent reminder of the man he used to be. The next 6 months were a quiet, grinding hell. Sterling was right. The tattoo was a poison. Kai tried to get a job to start over. He went to interviews at every high-end restaurant in the city. The initial meetings always went well. His resume was flawless, His reputation as a phenom in the underground scene preceded him. They were excited, eager, and then would come the handshake. He'd extend his right hand. The head chef or owner would take it, and their eyes would inevitably drop to the back of his hand. The smile would tighten. Their eyes would flicker with recognition or confusion or pity. The questions were never direct, but they were there. "An interesting choice," one said, his grip loosening. "Quite a statement," said another, pulling his hand back a little too quickly. No one hired him. The calls never came. The wilted leaf was more powerful than any letter of recommendation. It was a secret handshake he didn't know he was making, a signal to the inner circle that he was damaged goods, that he had challenged the king and been marked for his impudence. His savings dwindled. His ambition curdled into a sigh or daily shame. He ended up taking a job as a line cook at a greasy spoon diner in Queens, working the griddle for 12 hours a day. He'd flip pancakes and burgers with his left hand as much as possible, keeping his right below the counter. But he could always feel it there, itching as it healed, then settling into a dull, permanent presence, a scar on his soul made visible. One Tuesday night after a grueling shift, Kai was walking home, the smell of grease clinging to his clothes. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a blocked number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Hello?" "Kai," the voice said, calm, controlled, unmistakable. The sound of it made the hairs on his arms stand up. It was Sterling. Kai stopped dead on the sidewalk. "What do you want?" he hissed. "I trust the past 6 months have been educational," Sterling said, ignoring his hostility. "Humility is the most vital, yet least palatable of seasonings. I find it must be administered in heavy doses." "You ruined my life," Kai said, his voice thick with hate. "No," Sterling corrected him smoothly. "I ended the life you were pursuing. I am now offering you a new one. Your probation is over. It is time to begin your real work." Kai was silent, his mind reeling. Probation, work. "That mark on your hand," Sterling continued, "you have been thinking of it as a brand of failure, a punishment. You are wrong. It was never a punishment." There was a pause. "It is a uniform." His breath caught in his throat. The silent woman with the cracked wheat stalk. The unseen sommelier with the shattered glass. "I have been assembling a team, Kai. A collection of the most brilliant, most promising talents I have ever encountered. Each one an artist, and each one, like you, possessed a fatal flaw that I was forced to correct. Each one carries a reminder of their lesson." He let the implication hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "There is to be a state dinner in 2 weeks at a foreign embassy here in the city. The menu is a state secret, a culinary document of immense political and economic value. My client wants that menu, every recipe, every technique perfectly replicated. The security is, of course, absolute. An impossible task for any normal team." He paused again, his timing as perfect as his cooking. But we are not a normal team. We are a ghost kitchen, a black ops culinary unit. Your way in is as a low-level prep cook, a position I have already secured. No one will look twice at a line cook from Queens with a regrettable tattoo. He was offering Kai a way back, not to the life he had lost, but to something else. Something dangerous, clandestine, and undeniably thrilling. He hadn't just broken him. He had been reshaping him, forging him into a tool for his own purposes. The wilted leaf on his hand suddenly felt different. It no longer felt just like a mark of shame. It felt like an initiation. "The choice is yours, of course," Sterling said, though they both knew it wasn't a choice at all. The old Kai was dead. He had died in that white room. The question was, who was he now? Sterling left him with one final, haunting question that echoed in the silence of the empty street. "Are you in, chef?"